The house had always been a place of warmth and nostalgia for me. Growing up, I had spent summers there, running through the overgrown garden, exploring the attic full of forgotten treasures. But now, as an adult, I was here to stay. My grandmother's death had left me the house, and with it, a strange sense of duty to preserve the home that had shaped so many of my childhood memories. The house was old, creaky, and smelled of dust and time. As I walked through the rooms, I could feel the weight of history in the walls, as if every floorboard, every faded wallpaper, had a secret to tell. It wasn't a home I had ever expected to inherit, but now it was mine. The decision to leave the city behind and settle here had come at a time in my life when I was craving silence, a break from the hustle and bustle. I thought the solitude would help me clear my mind, to finally escape the suffocating weight of my chaotic thoughts. My first night in the house was unsettling, though. The silence was too thick, too heavy. The house seemed to breathe around me, settling into the night with an eerie groan of the floorboards and a creak from the walls. I had spent the day sorting through old boxes, uncovering keepsakes, forgotten photographs, and books that smelled of mothballs. But I couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. It wasn't until I ventured into the attic that I first felt it, the strange sensation of being watched. The attic door was tucked away at the end of the hall, almost as if it were trying to hide itself. I had never been up there before, and I'd always been warned not to go. My grandmother had said it was a place of old things, things that didn't need to be disturbed. But now that she was gone, the attic was mine to explore. I reached for the door handle, the wood rough under my fingers. It creaked loudly as I pulled it open, revealing a dusty room filled with boxes and old furniture. The air was stale, thick with the scent of age and neglect. I stepped inside, my footfalls muffled by the carpet of dust beneath me. The space was cluttered, broken furniture, piles of yellowing newspapers, and old photographs in frames. But it was the mirror that caught my eye. It stood at the far end of the room, partially obscured by a pile of old books. The frame was intricately carved, dark wood with twisting vines, and what looked like faces hidden in the design. The glass was large, almost too large for the space, and it reflected nothing but the dim light filtering in through the small attic window. I don't know why I reached for it. Something about the mirror drew me in. Maybe it was the feeling that it didn't belong there, or maybe it was the way the air seemed to grow colder as I approached it. I ran my fingers over the frame, tracing the carving of the faces, feeling an odd sense of unease settle in my stomach. I pulled the mirror out from its hiding spot, and as I did, I felt a strange shift in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. For a moment, I simply stared into the mirror, my reflection staring back at me. But then, something changed. The reflection in the mirror began to twist, the image distorting, and I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman in the mirror, my reflection, wasn't quite right. Her eyes seemed too wide, too dark. Her face was pale, almost lifeless, and her expression wasn't mine. She looked haunted, like something had taken her soul. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The mirror flickered like a broken television screen, and for a brief second, I saw something else. Something not reflected in the glass, but in the shadows around it. A figure, dark and towering, watching from the corner of the attic. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, the only sound the thudding of my own heartbeat. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck, and my hands trembled as I set the mirror back against the wall. The unease had settled deep in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had uncovered something I wasn't supposed to find. That night, sleep came slowly. The house creaked and groaned, the wind howling outside. I tossed and turned in bed, the events of the day playing over and over in my mind. And then, around 3 a.m., I woke up with a start. My body was covered in a cold sweat, and my heart was racing. Something had woken me. It wasn't the wind, nor the creaking of the house. It was something more. A sound. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. A voice. It was coming from the attic. I lay there in the dark, straining to listen, but the voice was so soft, so faint, that I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a whisper, or perhaps a murmur, but it was there. And then I heard something else. A faint scraping sound, like nails on wood. It sent a shiver down my spine. I sat up, my mind racing. Should I go up there? The thought terrified me, but I felt drawn to it, as though the house itself was calling me, pulling me toward the attic. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to face whatever was up there. But something deep inside me, something I couldn't explain, told me that I had to. I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand and hesitated for a moment, the beam of light cutting through the darkness of the room. I could still hear the whispering, the scraping, louder now, closer. Slowly, I crept toward the door and opened it, the cool draft of the hallway hitting my face. The sound grew louder as I made my way to the stairs, each step heavy with dread. When I reached the attic door, I stopped. The whispering had stopped too, and for a moment I thought maybe I was imagining it. But then I heard it again, a faint, soft whisper, like a breath against my ear. "You shouldn't have touched it." The voice was clear now. It wasn't a murmur anymore. It was distinct, and it was coming from inside the attic. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and pushed open the attic door. The room was still, silent, the mirror standing against the far wall as though it had never moved. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper than before, darker. And then I saw it, the reflection in the mirror, now clear and unshaken. But it wasn't just my reflection anymore. There was someone standing behind me. I spun around, but the attic was empty. No one was there. The voice echoed in my mind, as real as if someone had whispered it directly in my ear. "You're too late." The room seemed to close in on me as I backed away from the mirror, my breath coming in quick gasps. Something wasn't right. Something was watching me. I turned and ran down the stairs, not looking back, not daring to. The whisper followed me, fading into the darkness of the house. But as I reached the bottom, I knew something had come with me. Something was in the house now, and it wasn't going away. The house felt different the next day. The air was thicker, more oppressive, and the walls seemed to press in on me as I moved through the rooms. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the house was no longer just a house, but something alive, something aware of my presence. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that the events of the night before had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. But deep down, I knew better. The mirror, the voice, the shadow in the attic. It was all connected, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I tried to go about my day, pretending everything was fine, but every room I entered felt like a trap, every floorboard creak a warning. I couldn't stop glancing toward the attic stairs, the door now closed tightly, as if it were trying to keep me from going back up. And that damn mirror. It haunted my thoughts. I had to know what was happening, what I had uncovered, but I couldn't shake the terror that gripped me whenever I thought of facing it again. I spent the next few hours doing anything I could to distract myself. I unpacked more boxes, reorganized the kitchen, and tried to make the house feel like home again. But it wasn't working. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every corner felt too dark. I could hear the faintest whispering when I stood still for too long, like the house was speaking to me in a language I didn't understand. By dusk, I had given up trying to ignore it. I had to go back to the attic. I had to confront whatever was happening in that room. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if something was creeping behind me. The house was unnervingly quiet as I made my way up the stairs. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of it deafening in the silence. When I reached the top, I could see the attic door slightly ajar. It wasn't like that when I left it. I hadn't touched it. But there it was, cracked open just enough for me to glimpse the darkness beyond. I stepped forward, each movement slow, measured, as if I were moving through thick, oppressive air. My fingers brushed against the door frame, the wood cold to the touch, and I pushed the door open. The attic was exactly as I had left it, cluttered and musty, but something had changed. The mirror was no longer where I had left it. It had shifted, its reflection now facing me directly, as if it had turned on its own. I took a cautious step forward, my flashlight casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The air was colder up here, a biting chill that made my breath fog in front of me. I could feel the presence in the room, as if I wasn't alone. The silence was broken only by the faintest scraping sound from behind me, like nails against wood. I whipped around, but the room was empty. The mirror reflected my movements, my figure appearing before it, but it was different now. My reflection wasn't quite right. It was a moment behind, as if it was always lagging just a little bit. I reached out slowly, my hand trembling as I neared the glass. The cold from the mirror seeped into my fingers, but it wasn't the temperature that made me gasp. It was the eyes. In the reflection, my eyes were dark, unnaturally so. They were wide, and in them I saw something not human. For a moment, the reflection flickered, and I saw the shadow of a face behind me. It wasn't my own. The face was pale, featureless, its eyes hollow and empty. I felt a sudden surge of panic as I stepped back, the floor creaking beneath my feet. But as I did, the figure in the reflection began to move. It mirrored my actions exactly, but as I turned away, it stayed there, watching me, its eyes never blinking. "Don't leave," the voice whispered again, clear and sharp. It was coming from the mirror. The sound of it was almost deafening now, like 100 voices merging into one, desperate and pleading. "You belong here now." I couldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear and confusion. The reflection in the mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was something else, something real. I could feel its presence, its malevolent energy seeping into me, into my very soul. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls shifting and twisting like they were alive. Then, suddenly, the whispering stopped. A cold silence fell over the attic, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined everything. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was gone. I turned quickly, my heart racing, my body trembling with a terror I couldn't explain. But the attic was empty, silent. There was no figure, no movement. I reached for the mirror again, my hand shaking as I touched the cold surface. I wanted to see if it was real, if the reflection had really disappeared. But the moment my fingers brushed against the glass, I felt a pull, a force, cold and unyielding, tugging at me. The reflection snapped back into view, and this time it was not just me standing there. Behind me in the glass was the pale figure I had seen before. It was no longer just a shadow. It was real. It was right behind me, its hollow eyes fixed on me, its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I gasped and pulled away, stumbling back toward the door. The attic was spinning, the world around me warping as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest tightening as the walls seemed to close in. And then, with a sudden crash, the mirror shattered. The glass exploded outward, pieces flying in all directions, and in that split second, I saw it. My reflection, standing behind me, reaching out toward me with fingers that were not mine. I screamed and turned to run, but the door slammed shut in front of me with a deafening bang. I was trapped. The room began to darken, the shadows closing in on me, and I could hear the whispering again, louder now, swirling around me like a storm. It was coming from every direction, from the cracks in the walls, from the broken pieces of the mirror, from within me. The voice was no longer distant. It was inside my head. "You can't escape." I tried to breathe, tried to focus, but it was too late. The darkness had swallowed me whole. The darkness was suffocating. It wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, pressing in from all sides, pushing the air out of my lungs. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything except for that relentless whispering, growing louder and more insistent. It wasn't just in the attic anymore. It was inside me, inside my mind, crawling through my thoughts, digging deeper and deeper into my consciousness. My heart was pounding, each beat echoing in my chest like a drum, but the whispering drowned it out. I could feel something moving in the shadows, something cold, something ancient. It wasn't the house anymore. The house had become part of it. I had crossed a line when I touched the mirror, when I stared too long, when I dared to disturb what should have stayed hidden. I stumbled backward, my hands outstretched, searching for the door, but the room was a labyrinth, the walls warping and shifting, pulling me in all directions. My feet couldn't find solid ground. My breath was shallow, ragged, as I desperately tried to make sense of the impossible. The floor beneath me felt unstable, as though it could give way at any moment. But when I tried to reach out for something to hold on to, I couldn't feel anything solid. And then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of feet shuffling across the floor. I froze. My eyes shot to the corner of the room, where I thought I had seen a figure lurking before, but now there was nothing. Just shadows. Yet the sound was unmistakable, the soft scrape of feet dragging, getting closer and closer. I gasped, the air too thin, my chest too tight. I had to get out. I had to escape this nightmare. The whispering had grown louder now, a cacophony of voices, all of them speaking at once. "You can't leave. You're mine now. Forever." The walls seemed to close in tighter around me, and I could feel the weight of them pressing against me, suffocating me. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough wooden beams that framed the attic. For a moment, I thought I felt something, an opening, a gap in the walls. My body was frozen with fear, but I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. I turned and ran. My legs moved mechanically, stumbling, dragging me forward even though I couldn't see where I was going. The whispers were deafening now, filling my mind until I could no longer tell where the sound ended and where my thoughts began. Every step felt like I was wading through thick mud, my movements slow, heavy, as though the very air was trying to pull me back. And then, nothing. The whispering stopped. The silence was even worse. I could still feel it, something pressing against me, something following me, but the noise had stopped. I stood there, in the pitch black, straining my ears, waiting for it to start again, waiting for the next sound, the next step, the next moment of terror. But there was nothing, just silence. I took a slow, hesitant step forward. The air was cooler now, and as I moved, I could feel the temperature dropping. I wasn't sure whether the chill was from the house or something else, something deeper, something darker. The attic door was still closed, but I was standing right beside it now. I could feel the cold draft seeping through the cracks in the door frame. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged in my chest. I pressed harder, my hand trembling as I pushed with all my strength. And then, with a groan, the door creaked open. I stumbled forward, nearly falling, my legs giving way beneath me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, the pressure, the presence. It was all around me, pressing on my skin, in my lungs, in my mind. The attic was no longer just a room. It had become a place where reality itself didn't make sense anymore. The air was thick with the energy of the mirror, the lingering weight of whatever had been trapped inside it. I didn't know how much time had passed or how long I had been running through the shadows, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I ran down the stairs, my body screaming in protest with each step. I didn't care. I had to get out. The door, my only escape, was just ahead. I could hear the sound of my feet pounding against the wooden floors, and I felt my pulse race as I neared the front door. The light outside was dim, barely any sun left in the sky, but it was enough. It was freedom. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking violently, but as I gripped it, I heard something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A voice. "Leaving already?" It was faint, barely a whisper, but it was unmistakable. The voice that had been following me, the voice in the mirror, the voice in my head. It was here. It was in the room with me. I jerked the door open and ran outside, my legs weak but moving faster than they had ever moved before. The cool air hit me like a wave, but it didn't stop the feeling that I was still being watched. I turned around, expecting to see something in the doorway, but the house was empty, silent. I kept running. My feet slapped against the pavement, each step an effort to escape the nightmare that clung to me. But I knew, deep down, that I hadn't escaped it. It was still there, somewhere, in the house. And even though I had made it outside, I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me, reminding me that I couldn't run far enough. The mirror was still inside. It would always be there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to disturb it. I couldn't save the house, couldn't stop what had already been set into motion. All I could do was run. And even then, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Because once you touched the mirror, you couldn't escape. And no matter how far you ran, it would follow you. always.